This assembly is jointly organized by New Asia Lectures on Confucianism. Today, we are honored to have Professor Paul Goldin, Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations, University of Pennsylvania, to share with us his topic of fair and foul in Chinese philosophy. We are also pleased to have Professor David Chai, Department of Philosophy of CUHK, to introduce the speaker. Professor David Chai, please.
Good morning. Welcome to the bi-weekly assembly and to the 11th New Asia College lecture series on Confucianism. I have the great pleasure and indeed the honor to introduce an old friend of mine, Professor Paul Goldin from the University of Pennsylvania in the US, to deliver the lecture today. Last night, we had a lecture on the uncrowned king in early Confucian thought, early Chinese thought. And today we are going to have something a little bit different, discussion of the concept of typically translated as evil in English, but Professor Goldin will dispute that translation. So a few remarks. Professor Goldin has been a professor at the University of Pennsylvania for almost as long as all of you have been alive, for a long, long time. He is one of the major figures in the study of early Chinese thought, history, philosophy, more recently aesthetics and literature. Can we have the chatter a little bit quiet, please? Yeah. He's been a very productive scholar, too many works for me to list. Most recently, Professor Goldin has published a book on aesthetics in China, the worlds of classical Chinese aesthetics, something that is close to my area of research. A book that perhaps some of you, those of you who study philosophy, would be familiar with, published 5 years ago now, by Princeton University Press, The Art of Chinese Philosophy, 8 classical texts and how to read them. This has received many, many 5-star reviews on Amazon and a lot of positive reviews from our peers. So if you have an interest in Chinese philosophy, but you're not sure if you want to major in it, this would be a good place to begin. Professor Goldin's PhD thesis actually was on the ancient Chinese figure Xunzi. That was done more than 25 years ago, about 25 years ago now, right? 30 years ago, and he published that with University of SUNY Press. Open Court in LaSalle in 1999. And that's one of the first books that I, as an undergraduate student, bought on Chinese philosophy. Although as a student, I was very poor, so I couldn't afford to buy a new one. I bought secondhand for maybe $10 back in those days, and I was very happy. But having read that and learned about Xunzi, it opened my eyes to the world of ancient China and to Chinese philosophy, and I've not looked back since then. Professor Goldin also is world renowned for his handbooks, his guidebooks, his historical anthologies on ancient Chinese civilization. To name a few, he has the source book of ancient Chinese bronze inscriptions, the Routledge Handbook on early Chinese history, the companion to Confucius, and many others. On a more personal note, those of you who take Chinese philosophy classes with me know that I like to can we be a little bit more quiet, please? I know you're all excited for Professor Goldin, but a more personal note, if you take courses with me on Chinese philosophy, you know I like to share a very, very large research bibliography. It's about 1,000 pages now. And I always encourage you to use that as a research tool. Well, the person who created that bibliography and who has maintained it now for how many years? 10 years, give or take, is Professor Paul Goldin. So we really owe him a debt of gratitude for maintaining this, updating it every year, multiple times a year in some cases. And it makes your job as students researching papers on Chinese philosophy that much easier, because you can do keyword search and all of that. So it's a wonderful resource. He actually has two bibliographies that you can download from his Academia EDU website. There's another one which is unfortunately password protected, and I'm not a hacker, so I can't do anything to share with all of you. But the main one is there for your enjoyment. So a public thanks to Professor Goldin for doing that. Really is a wonderful service to the field. So without taking up more time than is necessary, I would like to invite all of you to join me in providing a very warm and enthusiastic New Asia College welcome to our speaker today, Professor Paul Goldin.
Thank you, David. And I apologize for making you read my book in college. I didn't know. If I had, maybe I would have told the teacher to let you slide. Also, unless you are 30 years old, I've been at Penn longer than you've been alive. This is my 30th year at Penn. It's hard to believe. I imagine most of you are younger than 30. So some of my old friends are older than 30, but most of you out in the audience, I imagine, are younger than 30. This paper is for a collaborative volume on evil in Greek and Chinese philosophy, co-edited by two very distinguished scholars of Greek philosophy, Pavlos Kontos and Richard King. And Richard, whom I've known for a number of years, approached me and asked me to write a chapter about evil in Chinese philosophy. And my response to him was, we don't really have evil. And I think that surprised him somewhat. We have lots of other juicy words, but not quite the same thing as evil. So fortunately, he was open-minded and he said, great, write about that. So that's what this paper is going to be. The Chinese word that most comparatists have in mind when they refer to evil is Old Chinese ak. But scholars have long expressed unease over the equivalence. In no classical Chinese text does denote evil in an Augustinian sense. In his Confessions, Augustine recalls succumbing to peer pressure and stealing pears with a group of his street friends, not because he was hungry. In fact, tastier pears were available to him, but for the inimitable frisson of doing wrong. And here's his text in Latin, for those of you who can read it. For those of you who cannot, here's a translation. Let my heart now tell you to look upon it. What did it seek there? He's remembering this episode years later. And he's confessing the truth about why he stole the pears. That I be gratuitously evil, and that the cause of my evil be nothing other than evil itself. It was foul, and I loved it. It is difficult to say how a Chinese translator would have rendered Augustine's malus or malitia, because the very concept of evil committed for its own sake, rather than evil committed to satisfy appetites or desires or out of laziness or ignorance, is scarcely attested in classical Chinese literature. There are legendary antiheroes, such as Gong and Chiyou, who revel in wanton destruction and consequently need to be subdued. But philosophical texts do not anticipate that human beings will imitate them. If does not mean evil in a Christian sense, what does it mean? Historians of philosophy have provided useful and precise answers by studying its usage in diverse Chinese texts. In Mencius, for example, is the result of one's failure to develop one's natural capacity for good. In Xunzi, it is the result of following one's impulses without discipline or reflection. As a so-called putative verb, to consider something, the word is written identically, but read Old Chinese ox, and means to hate, to execrate. Thus, is behavior that should be execrated. The field has come so far that these claims are no longer controversial. What we have always lacked, however, is a convincing etymology. Philosophical discourse in Indo-European and Semitic languages rarely suffers from this impediment. A linguistically informed examination of may afford us a greater appreciation of its philosophical dimensions. Here, an old suggestion by Bernhard Karlgren, a Swedish sinologist who died in 1978, proves to be enormously helpful. Because he buried it in an unannotated heap of postulated cognates, many specialists are not even aware of it, and those who do know it often doubt it, but I think it's correct. Is related to ya, rax, ugly, inferior, second-rate, deformed. Now, when we say xinya, that's not the same meaning, of course. In the case of Asia, it's borrowed simply for its sound. Ya is merely with two affixes, an R infix, poorly understood, and an S suffix, a prolific indicator of derivation. Manuscripts excavated many years after Karlgren's paper furnish strong evidence for his hypothesis by frequently writing ya where one would expect Karlgren was unaware of this borrowing because it is not attested in received literature. Karlgren himself offered inferior and second as definitions of ya, but the salient one is ugly, as he surely would have discovered if he had attempted to expand and defend his etymology. The Han Dynasty dictionary Shuowenjiezi associates all of these words by defining ya as chou. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Old Chinese was a very difficult language to speak, meaning ugly. And simultaneously defining chou as kou can be considered This is rather like looking up big in a dictionary and finding large, then looking up large and finding can be considered big. Chou can also mean shameful and dirty. Another crucial point, chou must connote more than just physical ugliness. It also suggests an ugly smell. We know this because chou, second one, tkus. To stink is an obvious derivative. And in modern Mandarin, there are two words are distinguished only by tone. You would never see the connection just by looking at the graphs. It's only in the sound. Or u and chou must have been correlated in classical Chinese speakers' minds. In Han Feizi, a naive concubine who is being set up to infuriate the king is defamed for, quote, saying that she hates to smell your majesty's odor. What English word captures all of these nuances? Bad, execrable, ugly, shameful, dirty, and smelly. I propose foul, and its close cousin, filthy. It is a good Germanic word from Old English foul, rotten, but with early extended senses such as corrupt, dirty, vile, and guilty. Today we speak of foul play in both sports and detective novels, a foul odor, to foul one's nest, and so on. The range is paralleled in other Germanic languages. For example, in the modern High German word foul means both rotten and lazy. This is semantically very similar to the unrelated Latin word that Augustine used to describe his youthful sin, foida. Foida erat. It was foul. What do we gain by recognizing that the etymon of is foul? One benefit is a greater appreciation of the cultural dimensions of Mencius's theory of human nature. Xing. The idea we recall is that human beings are born with an innate capacity to become good. And it is in this sense that the Mencian tradition deems human nature good, shan. With sufficient effort, we should become good. If we fail, it is because we have not nurtured ourselves. As in 6a8, quote, thus if it obtains its nourishment, no living thing will fail to grow. If it loses its nourishment, no living thing will fail to decay. Think of a tree that rots in place instead of growing large and leafy. Mencius plays with both senses of in an easily overlooked passage, 4b25. Mencius said, if the Lady of the West, a legendary beauty, had been draped in uncleanliness, people would have covered their noses and passed her by. Even people who are if they purify and bathe themselves, are permitted to make sacrifices to the deity above. As before, ugliness is perceived by both the eyes and the nose. The contrast with the gorgeous Lady of the West implies, at least initially, that people who are should be interpreted as people who are ugly. But the stipulation that they must bathe raises the possibility that we are talking about people who have fouled themselves. And is this very different from people who have failed to develop their innate capacity for goodness? The daily task of moral discipline is akin to the daily task of washing away one's filth. Hence, the second sentence holds out hope that wretches who have heretofore succumbed to indolence might commence the process of self-reformation by returning to the ritual system. One day, they might not even be considered ugly. The natural antonym of foul is fair. The modern reflex of another good Old English word, fire, meaning beautiful to behold, but likewise with moral senses such as free of sin, immaculate, and proper. In Mencius and Xunzi, the standard antonym of is the aforementioned shan, good or adept. But our interpretation of is foul invites us to look for another classical Chinese antonym closer to fair. There is one, Mei, beautiful. It turns out that is the second member in two canonical antonymic pairs. Shan good and evil, and Mei beautiful and ugly, or, as I suggest, fair and foul. Taking Mei as morally beautiful, exemplified by terms like Meida, beautiful virtue. Many classical Confucian texts express the view that people inevitably have both Mei and qualities. Our task is to apperceive both, but to augment the former and suppress the latter. First, Analects 12:16, the master said, "The noble man perfects what is beautiful in people and does not perfect what is ugly in them. The petty man does the opposite of this." The second one on your list is from Xiaojing, in serving one's ruler. Comply with what is beautiful in him, but correct and rescue him from what is ugly in him. The next one is from Xunzi. There is no country that does not have beautiful customs. There is no country that does not have ugly customs. Next one is from Li Ji. Few are those in the world. Oh, sorry, I need to advance. Few are those in the world who are impartial enough to be fond of a thing, yet acknowledge what is ugly in it, or hate a thing, yet acknowledge what is beautiful in it. And then the next one from Dalai Leiji. Their bearing is upright and not offensive. Their speech is correct and not self-serving. They do not adorn what is beautiful in them, nor hide what is ugly in them, nor conceal their transgressions. Such are those who are said to possess moral substance. Sometimes the idea is that a charitable critic will highlight people's Mei and look past their So once again from Li Ji, among one's ancestors, there is none without something beautiful and none without something ugly. The principle of a bronze inscription is to cite what is beautiful and not what is ugly. This is the heart of filial sons and grandsons. Only a worthy can do it. But not all Confucians agreed that this is the right approach. Xunzi, for example, denigrates it as the practice of those who are obliged to serve in a cruel kingdom. Xunzi says, accordingly, they have made it their established custom to worship what is beautiful in him, uphold what is good in him, and evade what is ugly in him, hide his failures, speak of his strengths, and not cite his weaknesses. To Confucians, the material that best exemplifies the cherished combination of beauty and character is jade. As in the phrase yusa, jade-like countenance or jade-like luster, attained by paragons of moral self-cultivation. As Jessica Rawson has noted, jade has been prized since Neolithic times for its toughness, incorruptible beauty, and, quote, sensuous tactile quality when polished, unquote. It is against this backdrop that the disciple Zigong likens Confucius to a beautiful jade, meiyu, that should be sold for a good price instead of being stored in a case. Confucius's response, I am waiting for the right price. That is, a lordly employer who will appreciate his virtue. Xunzi was cocksure that, quote, the eyes distinguish between black and white, beautiful and ugly, unquote. And the Shunzi fragments assure us that, quote, a mirror presents the essence of a thing. Beauty and ugliness are effortlessly exposed, unquote. But other sources evince doubt Lao Tzu too questions this overconfidence in one's faculties. Everyone in the world knows that beautiful things are beautiful, but this is merely ugliness. The sentence is terse enough to permit multiple interpretations, but I like the one intimated by D.C. Lau. Our senses have been so warped by socialization that what we call beautiful is really ugly. It coheres well with the text's critique of the corrosive effect of indoctrination and conformism on our very judgment. Other sources challenge the assumption that moral and physical beauty are correlated. The former is consistently praised, the latter not necessarily. Moists complained that rulers hire, quote, those with beautiful eyes and faces, 面目美好者, rather than the worthy xian who can get things done. Zhuangzi and Han Feizi include the story of an innkeeper with two concubines, one beautiful and one ugly. Counterintuitively, it is the latter who is honored, not the former. The reason is that the beautiful one tiresomely considers herself beautiful, 自美, whereas the ugly one considers herself ugly. In today's culture, we no longer refer to beautiful concubines in our argumentation. Instead, we might illustrate the point with a coiffed lapdog that would be adorable if it did not constantly demand attention. Artistic beauty is not necessarily good either. Although mei and shan are antonyms of they are not always congruent. In Analects 326, Confucius contrasts Shao, the dance attributed to Shun, with Wu, the dance attributed to King Wu. He deems the former the acme of beauty and also the acme of good, but the latter the acme of beauty, but not the acme of good, presumably because Shun assumed the throne at the request of Yao, who had abdicated in his favor, whereas King Wu had to seize the throne by force. The antonymic pairs shan and mei are conspicuously absent in philosophical texts relating to statecraft, such as Shang Junshu and Han Feizi. In the sense of evil or wrongdoing, is rare in this literature. To my knowledge, the phrase xin, evil heart, is attested but twice, once in Shang Junshu, once in Han Feizi. The graph more commonly writes the verb wu, as in hao wu, likes and dislikes, and suo wu, what they hate. The populace is repeatedly said to hate hard work, strict punishments, and so on. The ruler must be firm enough to overcome this inertia. Hence, the phrase that comes next is not Jian malfeasance and treachery, but Jian hating treachery. Or when Wu is listed as one of the four causes of defeat in the world, 天下之败, it is Wu hatred, not evil. One striking policy goal is to induce farmers to hate merchants, 务商, and force those scoundrels to do productive work. How do these sources function without significant recourse to a concept of evil? On the whole, they are so convinced of the ruler's power to mold the people's conduct through effective rewards and punishments that good and evil are irrelevant, if not quaint. Confucians were wary of government by laws and standards, sometimes called 法治, because these do not necessarily improve people morally. In a prior publication, I used the modern example of a traffic light. One could be a thoroughly wicked person and still reliably stop at red lights. Han Feizi and its allies would have stood this example on its head. Who cares if people are thoroughly wicked as long as they reliably stop at red lights? All we need are instruments to control their behavior. Hence, the stock terms of abuse are treachery, 奸, self-dealing, 是 factiousness, 党, and of course, regicide, 是. Evil we can tolerate. Maybe we can even make use of it ourselves. Much of the gender-bending diction in Li Sao, the great rhyme prose at the head of Chu Zi, problematizes the many facets of Mei. At the start, the speaker announces that he possesses inner beauty, 有此内美, and refers to his sovereign as the beautiful person, 美人, a phrase that typically connotes female beauty. This godlike figure is not just beautiful, but also fragrant. Chen? He looks good and he smells good. Should be a fine match. But because the Lord heeds jealous slanderers and flatterers, couched as female, 中女, the speaker is impelled to leave the court and seek his fortunes elsewhere. His subsequent encounters are too extensive to be rehearsed here, but one involves a promiscuous goddess named Consort Fu, traditionally construed as the naiad of the Luo River, Luoshan. Dismayed by her licentiousness, he eventually abandons her too. He says, though indeed beautiful, 所以心美, she has no propriety. Let us leave her and find someone else. Although the diviner Lingfen assures him that he will eventually find his soulmate, it must be that two beauties will meet, the speaker ultimately despairs and hurls himself into the Miluo River. But first, a self-justifying envoy called Luan. Just before killing himself, he says, since there is no one adequate to join in making a beautiful government, 美政, I shall follow the spirits Peng and Xian to their abode. Now we understand the speaker's frustration. The fragrant Lord has failed to grasp that true beauty lies in building a beautiful government. The goddess, despite her carnal magnetism and daily self-care regimen, amusingly detailed, does not comprehend that true beauty lies in dutiful monogamy. Because the only standards that the speaker will accept are his own. There is no one in this world worthy of his devotion. In the hands of misogynists, the notion that beautiful people are not necessarily good devolved into the stereotype that beautiful women are intrinsically evil. The authors of Zuozhuan went so far as to place this prejudice in the mouth of a woman, namely, the mother of the renowned statesman Shu Xiang, known in later sources as Lady Yangsha Shu. At one point, addressing her sons, Lady Yangsha denounces a rival. Quote, she is beautiful, and I fear she will give birth to dragons and serpents in order to bring disaster upon you, unquote. The oppugned woman's crime seems to be nothing other than her pulchritude. Later in the text, Shu Xiang intends to marry a presumably attractive woman, but is dissuaded by his mother, who lists several femmes fatales from history and declares, I have heard that great beauty must possess great evil. Here, I think evil is best for after all. If Lady Yangsha's examples included any men, we might be able to interpret this beauty as ungendered, but no. Every one of her seductresses is female. Does Zuozhuan sanction this viciously sexist ideology? On the one hand, it discloses that Lady Yangsha was right about her rival. The other lady gives birth to Yangsha Hu, a boy, who is described as beautiful and possessed of courage and strength, a backhanded compliment. Mei er you yong li. He becomes a favorite of the grandee Luanying, whose later banishment brings about the downfall of the Yangshe lineage, although the redoubtable Shu Xiang is spared. On the other hand, it states clearly that Lady Yangshe was motivated by jealousy. Perhaps we are supposed to understand that her harangues are disingenuous and not to be generalized. The problem is that other passages in Zuozhuan, and indeed beyond, appeal to women's inherent and destructive sexual allure in order to discourage an undesirable marriage. No one seems to have objected that the commonplace is flawed, because if it is true that all women are inherently destructive, no man should ever consent to matrimony. But this is Fu Chen's tack when he remonstrates against the king's plan to take a bride from the people known as Di. Female potency is without limit. Women's complaints are without end. He layers in some disparaging comments about barbarians too. There is plenty of chauvinism in classical Chinese literature. If we are uncertain of the meaning of female potency, Yuda, a physician clarifies it in a related source. Too much nocturnal proximity to women causes the hideous disease called gu. The only countermeasure is to surround oneself with rugged male potency, nanda, instead. It is reasonable to understand Yuda in this sense as women's virulent sexual power, not female virtue, as the term is used in other contexts. In the preceding examples, I have translated Mei and as beautiful and ugly, because fair and foul can be ponderous in modern English. Since Macbeth, writers have to be careful not to overuse this pair. Thus, it should be apparent that I'm not urging mechanical translation. One must always take into account the context, connotations, and sociolinguistic register of a word or phrase when considering how to render it into English. But I do recommend my own practice. I start with what I can identify with reasonable confidence as the etymon, the banyi in Chinese, and proceed toward derived senses if that proves infelicitous. For I believe we should begin with foul. Thank you.
Let us express our gratitude again to Professor Paul Goldin for his wonderful lecture. We will now move on to the Q&A session. May we now invite Professor David Chai to come on stage and moderate the session. Professor David Chai, please. Please feel free to have questions for Professor Paul Goldin in person or through webinar.
Yeah, you see, philosophers are not the smartest people. The microphone was on. Yours is on as well, I guess. Yes, I feel like a celebrity on TVB having all the microphones on. There we go. So, very interesting lecture. We have a lot of time for questions about female power, male power, whether it is beautiful or so-called ugly, evil. Yeah. Professor Goldin has written a book, an authoritative book on sexuality in ancient China. So if you're interested in asking sensitive questions, he's the guy, not me. So anybody have a question? Is there a microphone?
Thank you, Professor Goldin. So I'm a student from the philosophy department here. I just wonder about the lecture. Yet you raised that we can start with the concept of foul to understand but there might be some criticism like maybe there is not a unified meaning in ancient Chinese text, and within the modern language, we should coin another term to study the whole system of ancient philosophical thoughts according to different philosophers. And maybe the same word had different meaning in different philosophers like Su Wang and Zhuangzi, or in Confucius term of usage. So I wonder what's the scope and also interpretation of your explanation of the foul in interpreting. Yeah, that's my question, and thank you.
Does this work? Oh, okay. Thank you for that question, because it gets to the heart of some of my deepest complaints about comparative philosophy, the interpretation of Chinese philosophical texts, and so on. Chinese philosophy is, I would say, the richest philosophical tradition for which we know next to nothing about the etymology of the philosophical keywords. If we're talking about Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, German, French, of course, English, we almost always know the etymology of the keywords. We know where the words came from. And etymology is not all you need to understand in order to be able to grasp the meaning of a word and use it yourself. But it is necessary. It is not a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary one. If you don't know the etymology of a word, you're flying blind. You don't know where the word came from. You don't know what kind of resonance the word would have had in native speakers' minds. And what we have done for too long in Chinese philosophy is simply borrow familiar words from the West and paste them onto Chinese words and hope for the best. That's why we say evil for There's really no other reason. And when I was approached to write this chapter, it was really a well-intentioned example of the same thing. The editors decided they wanted a book about evil, and let's include China. Oh, that's I would like to stop doing that. I would like to encourage other people to stop doing that and go in precisely the opposite direction. Let's try to reconstruct to the best of our ability what the Chinese keywords would have meant in their own language, to their own speakers, in their own discourse, and then ask, how comparable is this to evil? How comparable is this to good, virtue, and so on? Instead of simply assuming that we know what they mean because they fit comfortably within the categories of Western philosophical language and reasoning. So to get to your question, of course, means different things in different contexts. And at the end, I was saying, I am not encouraging everyone simply to use the word foul whenever you encounter in a classical Chinese text. That's what I meant by mechanical translation. You can't do that. In each context, you have to ask yourself, what is the word doing here? How is it being used? How is it playing off against other words that are in the same passage? What kind of resonances would it have had in the minds of participants in that philosophical connotation? And then choose what you think is the most felicitous English counterpart. But how do you do that? You can't do that unless you understand where the word came from in the first place. So that's why I said at the end, I recommend my method. Let's try to ascertain to the best of our ability, and it's very difficult. Old Chinese is an extremely difficult language, and our understanding of it is highly imperfect. But let's try to ascertain to the best of our ability what the etymon of the word would have been. And then we can see the derived extended senses a little more clearly and a little more rationally. I think it's pretty clear that begins in the semantic domain that's very close to foul. And then when moral philosophers use it, it drifts closer in the direction of evil. When people in literature, when authors and poets use it, it can drift in the direction of ugly rather than smelly. But the semantic field would have been interrelated in the minds of native speakers 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. Thank you for that question.
Very good. Other questions? So what are your thoughts? We noticed when we listened to Professor Goldin's talk, there seems to be quite a unique difference between the Confucian use or understanding of so-called 善恶, and that in Taoism, he didn't touch upon Buddhism, but we would even there find more differences. So we have a line from the Tao Te Ching where it says, beautiful words are not truthful, truthful words are not beautiful. How many of you have experienced such a situation? Somebody says something to you that is truthful and it hurts, right? What kind of a situation would that be? Because the opposite, if I say something that is beautiful, most of the time we think, oh, you're a koala, right? You were just flattering me. You were just saying something for me that I want to hear. Usually, the boys say to the girl, 我爱你, 我喜欢你, right? I like you, I love you. And the girl knows, oh, you are lying, right? 你骗我, 撒谎. You are lying to me, right? You are deceiving me. So what do you think? Is this, is Lao Tzu actually right? When you say something that is too beautiful, in English we say it's too beautiful to be good, or it's too good to be what? Forgot the too good to be right.
Too good to be true.
Too good to be true. Yes. So where does that come from? Well, maybe from Tao Te Ching. But what do you think? Is that actually a valid claim to make? Huh? Truthful words hurt the heart. Untruthful words, they don't do that. Any questions or comments about that before we let Professor Goldin respond? Do you think Lao Tzu was correct, or are the Confucians right? You need to be sincere with your words, with your actions, because that's a reflection of your moral virtue, right? Your moral cultivation. Or you should just be very carefree and not worry about hurting the feelings of others, as the Taoists would advocate. What are your thoughts on that? Today, all of you are very involved in social media. We perhaps are too old to be as interested in that as all of you. But on the internet, you can say whatever you want to say, right? And nobody cares if you hurt the feelings of others. But before internet, social media, you meet somebody, they can look at you and they can tell you are being truthful, you are being sincere, or you are, being false. You are deceiving with your words. What do you think? Can you say something beautiful and be true? Or must beautiful words always have a hidden aspect, a hidden meaning to them?
If you think you have a question in mind, but you're not sure, go ahead and ask, because in an auditorium with this many students, if you're thinking of a question, there's a very good chance that somebody else is thinking of exactly the same question. And if you both decide not to ask it, then it never happens. So if you're unsure, just go ahead and ask. Don't be shy. I don't know your name anyway.
Americans have a reputation of being very, we say, straightforward, right? Very blunt. They say what they feel. We in Canada, we are a little bit more reserved, right? In China, you don't say what you feel, especially the time period of Warring States China or earlier. You know, you go all the way back to Shi Jing, all those poems about love and jealousy and ambition, you need to use a lot of metaphors. So Professor Goldin talked about you to describe female beauty, your skin is as nice and smooth and white as jade. We wouldn't say your skin is green like jade because that's, yeah, right? So you're sick if you're like that, huh? So it's, you know, whereas somebody who is corrupt or flawed personality, you describe them as a rat or as a frog or some disgusting, ugly animal, yeah? So today we don't really do that, do we? Any explanations as to why? Any of you have any ideas?
I think we might be getting a question.
We're getting a question. Awesome.
Okay, good.
Professor Goldin, thank you very much for your talk. You emphasize so much that we should not be doing mechanical translation. Now, with the recent advances in AI, you know, AI is a tool. It can do translation quite well, at least in modern context. But what do you think, whether we should use AI as a tool to help with philosophy research?
I have controversial views about AI. Those of you who know me are probably not surprised to hear that I have controversial views.
Which are?
They're not directly related to Confucianism, but okay, I'll tell you my views anyway. 2 or 3 years ago, I was really shocking all of my friends and colleagues with my view that AI is probably our species' last hope. We're going extinct. I can't tell you when, but it's going to happen probably sooner than you think also. Wouldn't it be better to leave behind something that lasts than simply to go extinct and leave nothing behind? So 2 or 3 years ago, I was strongly in favor of fairly loose restrictions on AI research. You know, academia.edu is, Professor Chai mentioned it, I upload my papers there, my bibliographies and so on, and many people have canceled their membership in academia.edu because they make their material available to big tech AI engines. And my view is the opposite. If they're going to make my work available to big tech AI, they're welcome to it. Why am I doing any work at all if I'm going to keep it from AI? People thought I was crazy, and they're probably right. I do have to say that 2 or 3 years later, I'm a little bit more pessimistic because I'm not as sure that the current versions of AI are going to be able to achieve a level of intelligence that I was hoping for. Maybe future versions of AI, sure. The issue was superintelligence and whether we should be afraid of it. And my position was, well, yes, of course we should be afraid of it, but we have to embrace it, because if we don't, we're simply going to die without a trace.
Okay. We have a few questions online.
Okay, after that,
So I will
glum
we don't want to end on a very depressing
perspective.
note, so more cheerful questions. We only have time maybe for 2. So one question, is it possible to extend this understanding of mei and to the development of literary genres and performance forms like CQ? I want to briefly answer.
Yes, Of course. However, one thing that's striking when you look at the sources of classical Chinese aesthetics is that beauty is not a primary criterion. There are various theories about how you judge the value of an artistic work, whether it's literature, music, painting, calligraphy, and so on. And the criteria are often enough completely separate from beauty. For people versed in Western aesthetics, that comes off initially as a shock. So calling something May, calling an artistic work May, is not necessarily a compliment. It's more like a judgment. But it's not necessarily a compliment because it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a comment on the aesthetic success of that work. And one example, there are many in the book that Professor Chai mentioned that I published last year. But one example that I mentioned in the paper itself was when Confucius said that both the Shao dance and the Wu dance are beautiful, but only one is good. The other one is not good. And that had everything to do with the behavior of the two men to whom the musical pieces were attributed.
Okay, very nice, thank you. Final question before we end for today. Why use mei and instead of shan and What's the difference between mei and shan?
Well, I think it's very important to bear in mind that there are both. Now, there has been quite a lot written in every language on shan rather less on mei and it's the kind of phenomenon. Once you start going through familiar literature with this new recognition that mei is a very important pair, then you start to find lots and lots of examples that didn't quite register with you the first time you read it. And I gave some examples in the paper of very open and straightforward contrasts between mei and So the main reason why I focused on mei and rather than shan and is that I think it's been discussed less. But the other point that I wanted to make is that if we're understanding as foul, then the closer natural antonym is mei rather than shan. That is to say, if we say that foul conduct, foul behavior is then okay, then a natural antonym would be shan. But if we're going to recognize that that's a derived meaning and that it's not the very heart of the word, then the more natural antonym of is mei, which is beautiful, fair, with all of its complexities. Sometimes it's untrustworthy. Sometimes it's not so good. Sometimes it's associated with a dangerous, seductive power. But that's the more visceral antonym of I believe.
Okay. Do we have time for one more, or is our timekeeper? We have time for one more question. Anybody from the audience? Last chance. I know you're all hungry. There is one?
Okay, last question
It's hard to
before
see with
lunch.
the spotlight shining in our eyes. Last question, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, this question is not really related to the topic today, but I'm really interested in how the thoughts or resources from the traditional Chinese philosophy can benefit us today, especially from the perspective of psychology. I actually graduated from Penn, got a master's degree there in psychology. Now I'm teaching at UHK and researching on the how Chinese traditional culture can benefit us. Actually, not only Chinese, but also people around the world in the contemporary time. So I'd love to hear your perspectives.
So that's going to be an important theme in my lecture tomorrow. And time is limited, and I will get to questions like that tomorrow anyway. So, so I'll answer in a slightly different way. One thing that's very appealing about Chinese philosophy for non-Chinese people is that it is a great example, maybe the greatest example in the world, of a non-Western cultural and philosophical tradition that is ancient, rich, complex. For people who grew up in a Eurocentric environment and who are taught that philosophy is footnotes to Plato and all ideas came from Europe and then possibly North America, it's a very exciting alternative to see classical Chinese sources wrestle with many of the same questions. Now, they don't necessarily provide the same answers, but many of the same questions, and provide thoughtful and complex perspectives on these questions that are worth reflecting on and that you might never hear anything about if all you were to read were Western philosophy.
Thank
Very
you.
good. So on that, a reminder, Professor Goldin's next lecture entitled How I Teach Confucianism to Americans. It sounds a bit like a joke, right?
You have to go down to TST for that one, but get
tomorrow-
some dim sum while you're making the trip.
It's like Americans can't learn in the Confucianism. We didn't. Anyways, so tomorrow, 3 p.m., the function room on the 4th floor of the administrative building, Hong Kong Cultural Center in Tsim Sha Tsui. So if you want to hear more of Professor Goldin, you want to hear how the Americans learn about Chinese philosophy and whether it's accurate or not, maybe it's an American version of Chinese philosophy and not a Hong Kong or Chinese version of Chinese philosophy, then go to the lecture tomorrow and listen to what will be a very stimulating talk. But for today, let's once again thank our speaker for traveling so far to come and share his wisdom and his many, many years of teaching experience with us today, and wish him all the best for tomorrow. And he will return to the US on Monday. So smooth flight back home, uneventful arrival in the US because it's a bit, yeah. Even I'm afraid to go there, but that's a story for another day. So join me again in thanking Professor Paul Goldin for the lecture for today.
Thank you all for coming.